So now we're going to move on. We're going to share a more elementary example and model the process at the elementary level. And again, in reality, although the way that we're modeling this is in a one-on-one context, this would really involve many stakeholders. We would have the collaboration of administrators, of teachers, support teachers from ELL programs or Title I or special ed, really all working together, engaging in the process of a literacy assessment review. So this is just to provide a glimpse of what that bigger process would look like. And again, we're very fortunate to have today to represent the elementary point of view. So Joyce, if you could introduce yourself, please.
We'll be glad to. Thank you, Laura. I am Joyce Uglow, principal of Dyer Intermediate School in the Burlington Area School District. I have a passion for reading, but I do not hold a reading specialist license.
And we're just very excited to have not only an elementary point of view, but also a district administrator point of view here. And so again, just our contextual information at the top. You can see here that this would be a literacy assessment review focusing on grades 4 through 6. We would fill in the names of the multiple team members that we would have involved in this process. And Joyce, if you could just for a moment, list some of the reading literacy assessments that are administered to students in grades 4 through 6 in your school.
We use, for the universal screener, we use the Measures of Academic Progress, otherwise known as MAP. And then we also use the Scholastic Reading Inventory. Once in a while, we'll do running records when we need to have very specific miscue analysis information. But we do an awful lot of work in teams. So they might bring their common assessments, they might bring their observation checklists. When I say bring, I'm talking about coming to a professional learning community team meeting or a staffing meeting where people will bring their classroom assessments, their MAP information, or the Scholastic Reading Inventory information to the team.
Great, thank you. And so again, as a full comprehensive literacy assessment review, we would take some time and investigate all of those different assessments. And so for just really the purpose of modeling the process, it looks like Joyce has already filled in our template document with information about 2 different assessments. And so it looks like we're going to be talking about writing rubrics. And it looks like you've also included some notes about the SRI. And the one thing that I want to point out here is that this would be a good example of how you could work the process by asking participants to jot some notes in the Google Doc before coming to your bigger, more comprehensive conversation about all of those literacy assessments. So, so walk us through first. So we'll first talk about the writing rubrics, and you'd mentioned, Joyce, that you wanted specifically to talk about the writing, and can you talk a little bit about why?
Writing is an extremely important subject area, measured by high-stakes tests, but also the need for writing instruction to improve is one of those areas on which I've been focused for, I don't know, about 20 years. And so I thought, when you asked me if I wanted to work with you on this, I thought I need to focus on writing as well. So we've designed some writing rubrics based on the standards, and that's what I included in here.
Great, thank you. And so we can see that you answered each of the questions, and so this is an assessment that is administered to all students in grades 4 through 6, and that they are given 3 on-demand prompts in September, January, and May. That it takes students about 1 class period to complete this assessment. It's given in a whole class kind of taught context during class time. And so it's the student's teacher who's actually administering this assessment, and then scoring is done by the whole staff, and the training is job embedded into your PLC context at your school.
Right. When I say the scoring is done by the whole staff, for the past several years we've been really focusing on writing across all of the disciplines. And so even the music teacher and Phy-Ed teacher have been involved in doing the scoring of our on-demand prompt. At the beginning of this school year, one of the science teachers, 6th grade science teachers, sent an email out saying, "Oh my gosh, I can so tell the work that we've been doing on writing, these kids can write an argument in science with proficiency."
Wow, that's really powerful. And one question that I have about the administration here, you talk about the assessment being given in class. So what does that mean for students who may be pulled out? Do you have students who are pulled out? I'm thinking of specific programs, maybe ESL programming or special ed programming. How does that work?
Yes, if students aren't in the ELA classroom and they're in a pull-out program, they also view and listen to the prompt and respond to it, because we really want to see growth of all of our students, even if they're English language learners or special education students.
Yeah, maybe especially for those students. Yeah, okay. Yeah, great. That's helpful. Okay, so moving on to talk more about this writing piece. So then we would focus on the constructs and format, and we can see that this is a criterion referenced assessment. The writing samples are scored by 2, sometimes 3 teachers. Discussion may take place if the ratings vary too widely, and this is similar to a performance task. And it looks like you're focusing on that 6-trait model of writing and writing components.
Yes, and the types of writing that are focused in our standards, narrative, opinion, / argumentative, depending on which grade level, and informational text. So we're teaching the components, what's required of those types of writing. And so we want to measure, are they picking that up and using and applying those components in their pieces of writing. So we're looking at ideas, organization, etc., along with being able to support their opinions or support their facts that they've done in their mini research projects or their large research projects. Informational text.
Great. And so you've made some notes here about, and maybe I'm skipping ahead, so never mind, sorry. I'll come back to the thought that I just had. So, so regarding the content, the assessment measures your students' proficiency with varying types of writing, with the 6 traits, supporting evidence, and this is really aligned to the Common Core State Standards for Writing and Language.
Yes, and we've been working very hard to integrate language into our writing instruction. So on our writing rubric, we are also thinking about the language standards, not just the types of writing and how to write it, but making sure that we are teaching and helping our kids reach those standards of language.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much research about the fact that that's really an embedded kind of learning. That learning is most powerful when it's embedded rather than in isolation. So that's what's happening here. So the results are available 3 times a year, and it takes 2 to 3 scoring sessions. The student receives feedback immediately following the scoring. The results are stored in writing portfolios, and you can disaggregate the results. So talk a little bit about the scoring sessions. Does that happen during PLC time, before school, after school, during teacher prep time? When does that happen?
Mostly during PLC time. We've taken staff meetings to also work on it. And the conversation in amongst the team members scoring pieces together has really strengthened our understanding of writing instruction and scoring, because that's always been a point of contention where people say, well, if you score it one way, I might score it a different way. Hence, if 3 people are scoring a piece and discussing it, they come to more of a consensus of the proficiency level. I probably should have said also that the scores are kept in a digital data wall.
Mm-hmm.
So we keep track of year to year how well we're doing and how much we're improving. Writing is improving.
Great. And so do you take the time to disaggregate that data? How do you do that, or who's involved in that?
You asked, can it be disaggregated? Mm-hmm. And I said yes. Basically, we do a random sampling. We're not scoring all 463 pieces of writing. So we don't have an exact, this is all of our students in special education or English language learners. So it can be disaggregated. We haven't done that as much as we have look at our growth.
Okay, and that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, that's more like what I expected. So that's why I kind of asked for some follow-up on that question. Thank you. So moving towards uses of this particular set of data. So it looks like you use this as a formative assessment. It's really a benchmark assessment. You use your PLC format in order to have discussions around the data and then be able to apply the data. And it looks like advanced, proficient, basic, minimal, I'm guessing, are the kind of scoring, kind of where how your rubric is designed. And looks like you use this data to inform curricular decisions, like what components of the types of writing have been demonstrated as proficient for the grade level, which components do students need more instruction in, or perhaps different instruction. Looks like you're also using this data to support a school-wide SLO on writing instruction. And it's also used as part of a writing portfolio.
Yes. We're working hard on a standards referenced learning and reporting environment. We're moving toward that kind of reporting next year. So we've decided on the advanced, proficient, basic, minimal headings at this point in time, and talking to the students about self-assessment on, is your writing proficient? How do we know? Well, let's look at the rubric. These are the expectations. Let's look in your paper. Do we find it? So a lot of self-assessment with kids, not just write it, put it in the portfolio and be finished, but come back to it and work on it. Yesterday there was a classroom that pulled pieces out from their portfolio, and they worked on a mini lesson on sentence fluency, worked on their piece, put it right back in their folder for another stab at it at another time.
And so just logistically, who keeps the writing portfolios? Are these kept in individual classrooms? How do you ensure that everything stays in there?
It actually starts in kindergarten, and we call it the red assessment folder because it's a red folder. The classroom teachers keep that in their classrooms, and each year there are certain pieces that get put in the folder and they get passed on to Dyer because we're a 5th and 6th grade building. So then we pass it on to the middle school after that.
Great. And that really leads us into that kind of communication piece. So, you mentioned the digital data wall, the percentage of students at each of the proficiency levels. So you take a look at that information. And you mentioned that results are shared between grade levels. And you mentioned also here that you share information with families at family conferences, student-led conferences, student goal setting. So when I'm thinking about those folders being passed on, or even when those folders come to you, do you have the opportunity to actually have any kind of face-to-face conversation with those teachers of the grade levels below you or above you to talk about trends or really set any kind of goals for that particular group of students?
Boy, that sounds like a great idea. We should do that.
Okay. And that's one of the reasons that we engage in this process, to really think about things that we could do to make the data more meaningful, right? That's one of our goals.
We do use the red assessment folder quite a bit in staffings, in parent-teacher conferences, and goal setting with the kids themselves. They look at their past writing, they take a look at their current writing, and look to see where they can grow.
That sounds great. And, I'm also thinking about, academic career plans that are coming to Wisconsin in the next few years. And it feels like that's something that might lend itself, that student goal setting might connect really well with that process. Just kind of making some connections to some other Wisconsin initiatives. And again, you mentioned that connection to school-wide SLOs, and we'll focus on that in a future webinar. So when I'm thinking about how this information is shared with families, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, the folder gets brought out at conferences to look at. One of the things in the red assessment folder is a chart of the running records from kindergarten through 4th grade. We can talk about the progress that they've made across time. Did it plateau? Did it shoot up? And then the back side of that is Lexile levels that we record from the measures of academic progress and or the Scholastic reading inventory. So we can communicate the growth or the need for something different in terms of changing our instruction to meet the students' need if they're plateauing, not growing, and so on.
Great. Okay, so now we'll go back up to the top and maybe take a look at your notes on the SRI as a comparison, since this is a slightly different assessment. And so again, this is this one is not for all students. So this particular assessment is for students who have scored from the 1st to the 20th percentile on MAP. It's given in a specific window with 8 weeks between each administration of the SRI. Takes 30 to 40 minutes. This one is a computer-based assessment, 1-to-1 or small groups of 5, and costs about $40,000 for Read 180. Needs to be administered by a reading specialist, or maybe that's a decision rule that you've put into place. And the reading specialist participates in webinars as available and face-to-face training each year, and that's really answering that question about the training that's required to administer this assessment.
Right. We used to use the Scholastic Reading Inventory for all of our students until we started using the measures of academic progress, because we certainly don't want to have, we need time for instruction, we don't want to have too many assessments. So we decided that we would use the Scholastic Reading Inventory for those students in the lowest of the percentile rank. And then we have those students in the Read 180 material to bolster their reading skills and strategies.
Yeah, and I think that that's definitely a concern that a lot of educators and school personnel have, is that idea of, are we over assessing? And engaging in a process like this helps you to answer that question and to hopefully figure out where you may have some redundancies or overlaps in your literacy assessments in order to make a decision like, well, you know, we don't need to administer the SRI to all of our students, and looking at the kind of information that we get about on this assessment, we can, for example, make the decision to administer this to just one select group of students.
You're right.
So then moving on to the constructs and the format of the assessment itself. This is a norm referenced assessment, and we have some details about its technical adequacy, and it is a selected response format. And again, you may have had to do a little bit of research in order to find information about that technical adequacy piece.
I did. I went into the white paper for a couple of case studies that were done with many school districts. What's concerning is that a 1.5 effect size isn't going to make huge gains. So we know that we have to do many things in addition to make sure that our kids are growing.
Yeah, and I think that that's a very good point, and this is exactly why we ask the question about technical adequacy and why it's important to know that, really putting things in perspective so we can see the whole picture. So when we take a look at the content, the SRI is an assessment that measures reading comprehension. It yields a Lexile, and it's aligned to the Common Core State Standards reading standards, both informational and literary text.
Yes.
So the results are available immediately after the SRI is completed, and results are stored again as part of a student portfolio, as part of a digital data wall, and again these results can be disaggregated by subgroup.
And that's a little easier to disaggregate because pretty much it's the students with disabilities or students who may not have had adequate instruction before. So it's the students that we're focused on. So yes, we disaggregate those.
Okay, so that you do a little bit more with this particular assessment. And you're using this as a benchmark assessment. Looks like what you have here, the reading specialist analyzes a student's progress and needs. And this assessment really informs the reading specialist's instruction in regard to the types of comprehension errors that were made by a student. And it informs word study. You also use this assessment to analyze students' growth in skills with reading, especially as they read increasingly more complex texts. And again, you use this as a data point as part of your SLD eligibility process, it looks like.
Well, it is not really part of the eligibility, but you know, it's information that here the students have been working in Read 180. We look at their Lexile growth. And is this somebody who needs something different, or is there a disability? That's the question that comes up. Not necessarily that everybody in Read 180 is going to be referred for a specific learning disability.
Right, but we always need lots of data points to make that decision, and so this is one data point, just as part of that bigger decision-making process.
Right.
So then moving on to communication. So this is results are shared in data review meetings with homeroom teachers, with the principal, reading specialist, school counselor, and results are shared in the form of graphs, charts, goal setting. Do you want to talk a little bit about the communication piece?
Sure. This is something relatively new for us as we're looking to put our heads together more often with data that we're gathering on our students and their growth. So we call it a data review meeting, working together with everybody who is involved.
Great. And so tell me, why might you share? Why might the results be shared with the principal?
Probably because I have my hand in everything that goes on. I need to know how our kids are doing, and it's important to me.
And why might the results be shared with a school counselor?
The school counselor really is somebody who keeps the academic and social, behavioral, emotional growth in check and in balance, and so the school counselor is an integral part of making sure that kids are growing. Mm-hmm. How are they growing?
And so I see you have goal setting here, and so I'm assuming that goal setting is about communicating the results with students and or their families.
Yes, that's really the students. Here I've read this book, and I was able to do these kinds of skills with proficiency, and here's where I want to go next. Or I read a book at this reading level, I'm really interested in this one. Might be a little above where the test says that I can read, but I want to give it a try. So lots of choice and conversations about what works best for kids.
Mm-hmm. Great. So you talk a lot in that uses kind of column about the reading specialist really using this data to inform instruction, and so I'm wondering if that information gets shared with other teachers as well.
Yes, she does a nice job of communicating back to the homeroom teachers about what she's doing, what strategies are working. We don't have a coaching model, but she works hard to help teachers understand how they can use those kinds of strategies or techniques in their own classes.
So by sharing this information with the homeroom teachers, then that allows other content area teachers to apply the information to their own instruction with these particular students. Would that be right?
Absolutely. When she's saying this student is working at this level and I found this to work, of course, if it's applied in science, there's going to be a transfer of that skill from her to other people and to other contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So again, then this is really this would really lend itself to then some reflection about the literacy assessment system that's in place in this particular school. It would allow us to have a bigger conversation about where we may have some needs within our literacy assessment system, where we may have some overlaps in our assessment system. It may allow us to evaluate how our assessment system as a whole is working. And again, we could just zero in on one of the components, for example, the uses of our literacy assessment data. Are we really using that data and applying that data in an effective way? or we could just focus on, the content. Are we measuring everything that we really need to measure? Are we measuring some things more than once? And that would be where we could identify some redundancies in our system as a whole. So again, thank you so much, Joyce, for being willing to share your information and help us really model this process and think about what it could look like at this particular grade level, at the elementary grade level. We appreciate your time and your information today.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm glad to do it.